Chosen by Danielle Asbury. Christmas Eve, 1882. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Anna glanced from her sewing to look up at the old grandfather clock which stood against the wall. It was only 8 o'clock. Why must the evening before Christmas always be so slow? The heat of the crackling fire in the hearth beside her had already started to warm her legs beneath the thick layers of her skirts. The sweet smell of peppermint and freshly cut pine penetrated her nose, the scent which had always caused Anna to feel safe and cosy, away from the bitter cold outside. Across the room, gracefully stood in the corner, was the impressive decorated tree. Many red bows, gold-plated beads, and small ornaments hung from the many branches. The flickering light from the fire reflected off the beads, created an illusion of the tree sparkling in the darkness. Shame we couldn't afford the candles for the tree this year. "Get back to your sewing, young lady," her mother nudged her. Anna looked over to her right and watched her mother amend some of her younger brother's breeches. Her mother had always been so gifted with the use of a needle. Anna sighed, for she would never mirror her mother on that regard. "You're always so idle," her mother commented, still continued to sew. Anna rolled her eyes. She wanted to tut out loud, but thought otherwise, for she didn't want a clip around her ear, as her mother had always threatened to do. "Do as your mother says." Her father was sat in his favourite rocking chair, smoking his long pipe, with his eyes closed opposite her. Anna remained silent, and returned back to her sewing. There was a loud thump upstairs, which caused all three of them to look up at the ceiling with frowning eyes. "That was your fault!" I heard a muffled child's voice from upstairs. "Damn children will put me into an early grave," her father grumbled. Anna couldn't help but think how old her father now looked. His hair and stubble had started to grey, deep wrinkles are now visible around his pale blue eyes. He recently always looked tired and out of breath. When her mother announced her pregnancy 6 years prior, many women in the village had commented she was too old to bear children, especially twins. But Anna's mother had always been strong-willed, her complexion continuously more youthful than her actual age. Her mother was indeed fortunate. "Boys, get back to bed," her mother shouted. "Yes, mother," both boys replied instantaneously, although not pleased with the command. Anna felt privileged, for she was now of age to be allowed up late in the evening with her parents. "Oh, I almost forgotten." Her father's voice interrupted Anna's thoughts upon her childhood memories, moments of when she had to depart for bed early. Anna glanced up at her father as he reached his hand down the right side of his rocking chair. Anna gasped as he held out a beautiful glass globe. He wound the small metal key at the base of it, and it began to play a small melody she had never heard before. The base of it was delicately detailed with comprehensive carvings of small fairies and flowers. The small pale pink gemstones glistened from the firelight. Inside the globe was a small cloaked figure standing alone on a cobbled street. She shook it and watched the replica snowflakes drift down. "How could you afford such a thing?" Anna held it in her trembling hands, for she hadn't seen or touched something so grand. With her mother working as a teacher and her father a respectable dairy farmer, Anna had always been more fortunate than the other children in the nearby village. But something as magnificent as this, a very wealthy lady could easily possess such a thing, not her. "Now you are a young woman. It is now time to pass this down to you. It belonged to your grandmother. She treasured it all her life. She wanted me to give it to you once you entered society." "Oh my! Look, mother, have you seen anything so beautiful?" Anna looked across to her mother, but her smile faltered as she saw her mother was staring at her father with a look of disbelief. Her mother must have quickly realised what Anna had said, and hastily placed a smile on her face and agreed with her daughter. Anna watched her mother inspect the globe with frowning eyes, for why was mother looking at father like that? After a short while, her parents gave her a hug, kissed her cheek and climbed the creaky stairs to bed. Anna was asked to clear the wooden table in the kitchen and disperse the fire in the sitting room. She felt uneasy with how her parents behaved before departing for bed, for her parents had never hugged and kissed her good night before. She recalled her mother quickly wiping away some tears, afraid of anybody noticing. Whilst cleaning the kitchen, she could not help but admire the glass globe which stood proudly on top of the large hearth. After clearing the kitchen and filling a large iron pot of water from the outside pump, she sat at the table to catch her breath. She looked down at her hands and grimaced, for her hands were red, scarred and blistered, evidence of hard work on a daily basis. She sighed, relieved to know she can most likely rest tomorrow on Christmas Day. She pushed herself off the bench, walked over the stone floor to the hearth, and gazed upon the fancy globe. I wish I was a lady, she sighed. She picked up the globe and gave it a shake once more to watch the snowflakes dance around the lone figure. Suddenly, she saw a small figure bow to her. Anna shrieked and dropped the globe. Before it touched the floor, it disappeared. Anna froze still, stunned. She stared at the floor. There was a loud knock on the door. "Mother! Father! Somebody's at the door!" she shouted up from the base of the staircase. There was no reply. Strange. There was another knock. Anna slowly crept towards the small window beside the door and peeped out. Nobody was there. She stepped back, convincing herself she was simply exhausted, for she had imagined the lone figure moving, the globe disappearing. "Good evening." A man's voice spoke out from inside the kitchen. Startled, Anna turned and peered through the doorway. She gasped as she saw a tall, black cloaked figure stand in front of the hearth in the kitchen. He wore a black top hat, his face hidden from the shadows from the burning fire behind him. The figure bowed down to her, same as how the figure had bowed in the globe. Anna shrieked back, "Please, don't fear me, for I won't harm you." Words felt trapped in her mouth as she stared at him, startled. Sweat began to moisten her palms, her heart pounding hard against the chest walls. "Who are you?" "I'm Rex. At your service, ma'am." "Rex?" she whispered. The figure nodded his head. "Oh, do forgive me how rude I must seem." She watched him quickly take off his hat and ran his gloved hand through his thick dark hair. Anna remained rooted at the doorway, one hand placed upon the banister and the other on the iron front door handle. What should she do? Go tell her parents or run away and find help? "Your grandmother warned me about you, ma'am." Anna frowned. "Excuse me?" She still couldn't see the man's face. "Your grandmother." He pointed to an old photograph of her grandmother, which leant against one of the large wooden beams above the door frame from which she stood. Anna swallowed hard. You met her?" Rex nodded. "She told me you'd be fearful. Her exact words were, 'Don't startle the poor girl, you must remain distant and introduce yourself.' Well?" He outstretched his arms. "Here I am." Anna looked around the kitchen while she slowly stepped further in. She heard him snicker behind his gloved hand. She looked at him, frowning. "Apologies, ma'am. It's just that you look so... So what?" she questioned. "Innocent," he finished, pressing his lips tight together. Anna's brow deepened, for she didn't expect him to finish the sentence with that word. "You're skinnier than I imagined. And shorter," he added. Anna huffed, for how dare he be so rude? Her eyes adjusted to the dimmer light. She could see the man was young, almost the same age as herself. With his figure blocking the hearth behind him, she could only see he had pale eyes, of what colour she was unaware of. He had a straight nose, strong jawline, with a faint scar down his left cheek. She couldn't help but admit to herself that he was rather handsome. She gave herself a mental shake. "Don't be so imprudent," she hissed to herself. "Pardon?" Anna froze and shook her head vigorously. She felt her cheeks blush. "You couldn't possibly know my grandmother. She passed away before I was born. You look to be my age." "Ah, yes. She did mention that to me as well." Anna remained silent. "Your grandmother isn't who you think she is. You see, she isn't dead. She's very much alive." He laughed a little. Anna instantly felt uneasy, realising he may actually be a madman. She looked around the kitchen for any form of weapon to protect herself. Suddenly she saw her father's stirrups for his horse, hanging from the nail on the wall to her right. She slowly began to step to her right, careful not to alarm the young man. "Your grandmother has sent me to bring you back. She placed me in that awful globe. 20 years I have been waiting. I must express how thankful I am for you releasing me. Your grandmother can be quite stubborn sometimes." "You're mad!" Anna exclaimed. Rex laughed. His voice seemed to have echoed off the walls. "I'm afraid not." He stepped closer to her, which caused Anna's lower back to press hard against the cold metal stirrups. She could see his blue eyes were intense. As he looked into her frightened green eyes, a smirk grew on his face. "It is now your turn to learn the truth." "I don't think so," she shouted, as she wrapped her fingers around the stirrups behind her back and pulled them around her right shoulder to aim them at his head. Within a second, the heavy stirrups crumbled into dust, leaving the leather straps wrapped around her hands. Rex simply smiled down at her sweetly. "She warned me about the stirrups," he added confidently. Anna looked upon her now empty hand, amazed, perplexed. Rex then straightened his cloak collar and turned away from her. She watched him strode across the stone floor and lowered himself on her mother's favourite wooden chair beside the fire. The embers of the fire reflected off his skin like millions of tiny diamonds. "What are you?" "Ah, a good question at last." Rex stretched out his long legs, crossed his black leather boots at the ankles and rested his gloved hands on his torso. "I am a Dranza, a being able to transport from one world to another through selected portals. However, we have limitations, and this particular mission will be my last. That's why I remained in the glass globe until the right time, to bring you back. Your grandmother trusted me most." "What is my grandmother if she isn't dead?" Rex grinned, revealing a white straight set of teeth. "You shall see." He then stood up off the chair. "You're the chosen one, Anna. You're the firstborn since your family was banished. Only your grandmother remained. Your father is aware of this, as he was instructed to give you the globe on your 21st birthday. Anna frowned. "But I'm only 20 years of age. My birthday isn't until June." "They all had to lie to you. It's a dangerous world here and the next. Many are in search of you, both good and evil. You must come. You must learn the truth, but staying here isn't wise, not now." But why?" "The moment you broke the glass globe, you had unsealed the protection spell crafted by your grandmother. They now know where you are. Your family are still protected, don't fear, but you're not. It is now up to me to take you back, and we will be with your grandmother. She will explain more once we arrive." I can't just leave my family. This doesn't even make sense," Anna exclaimed. She could feel an almighty sense of panic. After hearing what he'd said, somehow something deep inside her spirit made sense, and she couldn't quite explain it. "Your grandmother rules Valum, a kingdom not from this universe, a different world. You're next in the bloodline." But my family, will I ever see them again?" "Time, yes. Time lapses are different between two worlds. 30 years in Valum could be 3 years here on Earth. Now we must go." She could sense Rex's sudden urgency and anxiety to quickly leave the house. Before Anna could do anything, Rex outstretched his hand towards the bare wall to their left. Slowly the wall began to collapse inwards. A bright white light pierced the whole kitchen. Anna shielded her eyes against the intense brightness. "Trust me, Anna." His voice was soft and reassuring. She looked through the entrance portal in the wall and could see a snow-white forest ahead, waiting for their presence. Sparkling treetops stretched out to the horizon, with vast icy mountains which stood proudly in the far distance. The cold wind suddenly brushed against her flushed cheeks. "Will I ever come back?" she asked urgently. Rex grabbed hold of her hand and looked down at her with a grin on his face. "Of course. Now, where's your positive thinking, the Christmas spirit?" Anna looked behind her, up the staircase to the dark landing, and silently said her goodbyes. With that, Anna inhaled deeply and allowed a mere mystical stranger guide her through the portal. Was she a fool to believe him? She hoped not.